I know the criminal justice system is broken, totally broken.
In the UK, there is an epidemic of violence against women and girls, with government and the media raising these concerns. Rachel Williams, an activist, campaigner, and domestic abuse survivor,
Actually came to my place of work and shot me at point blank range with a sawed-off shotgun.
has dedicated her life to stopping this crisis. However, as more women are killed, it appears the epidemic is not stopping. And what about the 25 to 40% of all domestic abuse victims that are men? Perverse policing incentives, court systems, underfunded support systems. I had one question to ask Rachel. What is the problem with violence against women and girls?
Well,
Do you like crime? Do you like crime fiction? What about true crime? If you do, then why don't you sign up to my newsletter completely free? When you do sign up, you get a free sample of my best-selling police memoir, The Job's Fucked: Secret Diary of a Police Officer. You also get a free sample of my best-selling Detective Laura Warburton crime series, as well as a free sample of my dark, twisted thriller, I See You. If you're a bit of a sensitive reader, this book's not for you. You have been warned. Not only that, you're also the first to hear whenever I'm releasing a new book, doing an event, and much, much more. Scan the QR code on screen now, or click the link in the description of this video and join now. Takes 2 minutes and costs you nothing. Rachel Williams, thank you very much for coming on.
thanks for having me again, G.
Oh, it's always an absolute pleasure chatting to you. So, Rachel, we'll get straight into it. What is the problem with violence against women and girls?
Well, in the UK, certainly we've got an epidemic, and the stats speak for themselves. I mean, I've been in this arena now, probably active for about the last 10 years through my own experience, obviously, which you know, but your audience may not. I was in an abusive relationship for 18 years, which resulted in me leaving him, and then he came to my place of work after stalking and harassing me for 6 weeks and all the other shit that comes with it. Actually came to my place of work and shot me at point blank range with a sawed-off shotgun. Then he had the audacity not to only shoot me, but to kick the shit out of me whilst I was on the floor in the salon. He went off and hung himself, and then 6 weeks later my 16-year-old son also took his life, so hence why I'm very active in this arena. But I have seen the numbers increase and sort of plateau and sort of stay the same, but we do have an epidemic in the UK, violence against women and girls. It's estimated that 2.2 million females, 9.1%, and 1.5 million males, 6.5%, experienced domestic abuse in the last year. And this is a national emergency. There's no other way to say it. It's a national emergency. And if we don't stop it now, it's just going to carry on for the generations like we've seen before us.
I mean, when you're throwing out those statistics, I mean, just talk about your own experience, Rachel. Like, you've obviously come to terms with it quite a lot, because what you do talk about is pretty darn harrowing, and I encourage people to check out some of your content, some of the things you do talk about. We go into a lot more detail. Certainly our first interview as well, we do go into a lot more detail. But you mentioned that there's an epidemic against violence against women and girls. How come, if it's been an epidemic for so long, how come it's not being addressed or being solved properly, in your opinion?
My opinion is that unless something affects you directly or indirectly, most people don't understand, and some people don't give a shit, Jay. It's like, we see things like around cancer and stuff like that, and it's like, oh, that's sad, stand up to cancer, we watch the sad stories and all of that, but it's somebody else. It's happening to somebody else. So until it actually happens to somebody that you know or yourself, I think a lot of people, one, don't understand, and two, really don't give a shit because they don't understand it. So why would they give a shit? It's not affecting them.
Really sorry to interrupt. If you enjoy this kind of content and you want to support me and you want to see these videos before they go out anywhere else in the world, then why not become a Patreon? It costs you the price of a coffee a month. Simply scan this QR code here or click the link in the description. Support means the world. Thank you. I know from my own experience when I was in an abusive relationship, because obviously this is a bit different in relation to violence with women and girls. I was in an abusive relationship with a woman. She was abusive towards me. Even though I was in the police dealing with abusive relationships all the time, I didn't realize I was in one until it actually ended, until it got physical and violent. So I think part of it as well is, do you think people still associate abuse with it has to be physical or it has to be sexual? When it gets physical, there's been so much abuse already, and that's like the next stage up, isn't it? That's the escalation.
Yeah. And I always say, domestic abuse isn't just about the black eye, because the black eye is easiest identifiable. There's been violence, there's something gone on. But I always say, and as you know, I train the police officers, and that's hence how we sort of connected.
So we met. It is.
Yeah, so I deliver training to police and CPS and NHS, whoever wants the training, their organisation willing to invest. Obviously, it's not a freebie. But, when I say to police officers, certainly in general, listen, domestic abuse, when you look at it, coercive controlling behaviour is the heartbeat of the domestic abusive relationship. And I didn't realise that I was being coercively controlled. And some people say controlling and coercive behaviour, but you've got to be coerced first to be controlled. So it's always coercive and controlling behaviour. And I always say, if you went on a date and that person was extremely ugly to you on the first date, putting you down, taking the piss out you, even go so far as slap you, whatever, you would be a bit of a moron to go back for a second date, okay? So the flags are there straight away, the signs. But perpetrators of abuse are groomers, and it's a subtle process. And what they do, they'll tell you things that they think you want to hear. They'll mirror you. They'll zoom into some of your vulnerabilities they might be able to spot, and then they start comforting you, and it's all a grooming process. And then all of a sudden, before you actually know it, there's terms and conditions which are being put into your relationship by this controlling person, by this perpetrator, and you don't even know that they're in place. And you only figure that out then when you breach one of them, and then there's a consequence. And that's not necessarily a slap or anything like that. That could be something as simple as 24 hours of silent treatment. And then you'll rack your brains and thinking, shit, what have I done that's pissed him off so much that he hasn't spoken to me for 24 hours? So then you're thinking back, yeah, I said I was going to go out Saturday night, or yeah, I bought that new skirt. And then all of a sudden then you think, right, I'm not going to say that again or do that again. And then you basically become an extension of that perpetrator's will. So basically all your day-to-day activity in your life revolves around this perpetrator, and all you do then is things to appease them, and you just, pacifying that perpetrator.
So you actually reminded me then when you were talking about something what I went through about the 24 hours of silence, and you sat there going, what's the issue here? And it was literally a case of I didn't call them back quick enough. It was they said they wanted some space. We had a bit of an argument. I want some space. And I said, right, okay. And then they tried calling me and stuff like that. Then, and I said, okay, I'll speak to you later when I'm on my way to work. I don't want to text you. I want to talk to you. And it's right, okay. Next thing you know, phone down, every photo of us offline. She put herself as single, and she ignored me for 24 hours. And I was obviously messaging and going, what's going on? And then it was, stop. Why are you getting angry with me? Why are you getting annoyed with me? You've done this. And I'm sat there like, I'm pulling my fucking hair out here. What have I done?
It's an head fuck.
But that then teaches you a lesson of, okay, well, next time I'll call them back quicker. So it's them terms and conditions, like you said, you will call me when I want you to call me, otherwise there are consequences around it. So there was another part to what I was going to say as well. There's obviously a lot of this stuff talking about online, and people will name things as narcissism, the narcissistic and stuff like that. It's like, okay, you're trying to put people into a box there. You're trying to diagnose them with something. They're just an arsehole, and it's control and coercive behaviour. It don't matter what name you put on it. But you said there that when you meet somebody, they'll try to, they'll come across as really genuine, very kind, very compassionate, and they'll lure you in. What's the difference between somebody who is a domestic abuser trying to lure in their next victim and somebody who is just like genuinely interested? Because surely if a first date goes really well, they go, yeah, they were attentive, they were kind, they were caring. How can people spot the difference between that and, someone who isn't trying to hurt them?
It is a hard one, but I think once you've been a victim of domestic abuse, once you see the red flags, you can unsee them. And I think it's like the magic eye picture. Once you see that picture, it's always there. So, for me, yes, there are genuine people out there who would come across as, they're a little bit too nice. I can remember my mother when I met Mike, my husband now, which I met quite quickly after all the shit that I went through, when people were saying to me, you know, how can you trust somebody again, you know, after that? And I said, listen, I'm not going to let one arsehole, and that was my strap line, I'm not going to let one arsehole ruin the rest of my life. I was 39, you know, I nearly had to have my leg off. I nearly lost my life, you know. And my outlook on life have always been, you know, my glass is half full and not half empty. So when Mike came into my life, the first thing my mother said was, he's too good to be true, he's too charming. And I'm like, so my reaction to my mother then was, oh great, yeah, I'll go get another fucking arsehole then, and perhaps that, you know, that'll fit the mold, you know. So I was trying to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. But what I found myself doing, and I think a lot of victims and survivors will relate to this, I started pushing buttons. So I wanted to see where the fallout was, because I kept thinking then, well, perhaps he is too fucking nice. So then there's another side to him that I haven't seen, but he's suppressing it. So I started pushing buttons in to see if there was going to be a reaction, and there never was. So, you know, you can't tell really from a first date, but what I would say is, you know, always be on your guard, because sadly, you know, they don't come with a freaking tattoo on their head. That would be amazing if all convicted perpetrators had to have a certain tattoo on them, because they would be identifiable to us. But they are master manipulators. I always say they're like chameleons. They will morph into whatever situation they need to morph in. You know, I can remember Darren, you know, after going through the shit and all, when the police were arresting him, and, you know, he presented himself as this calm and vulnerable person to anybody connected with mental health. But yet to the police, he displayed a side of violence, you know, because apparently he had a deep mistrust for the police. So, you know, they are very clever, but it's being able to have the tools to be able to spot, hang on a minute.
When I was in the police, I always found if I arrested someone for controlling coercive behaviour, they would fit into two categories when they ended up in custody.
Yeah.
Either they would be everyone's best friend and butter would not fucking melt. And it was, I can't believe she's saying I've done this. This is absolutely ridiculous. And they try and really be like your best mate. Because then when you sit opposite interviewing him, you're going, this guy seems all right. But that's part of the manipulation.
Yeah.
These people manipulate everything. Or they go the other side. They will try and control every aspect of themselves in that custody suite. I'm going to kill myself. If you leave me on my own, I'm going to hurt myself. They'll kick off constantly. When's my shower? When's my phone call? When's my interview? I want my solicitor. I want this. It will be demand all the time. So it's, and just what you're saying about the control, the organizations as well, is we find that these abusers can, like you said, the chameleons, they can switch it on. And I think that's something what police officers and even the courts as well have to be aware of, is not necessarily look at the person directly in front of you, but look at the external evidence as well. Look at what else is happening around them. So, Rachel, just going back to the violence against women and girls part then. So you mentioned obviously about an epidemic and that it's getting worse. Why? I know that there's obviously a drive to change it and to support it and to stop it. What are the biggest obstacles when it comes to that, in your opinion?
I mean, we could talk about this all day, and there's all different facets, you know. But I've got my in the background my training slides at which I use, and I was absolutely gobsmacked. I know the criminal justice system is broken at the moment, totally broken, right? And I feel sorry for police officers who do an amazing job. They get all the evidence they need. You know, they're sending it to the CPS. Even the CPS charges now against domestic abuse have gone up, you know, I think for the third or fourth year running. And then he gets to court, and then you've got either magistrates or a judge sat behind the bench with no clue about coercive controlling behaviour, no clue about domestic abuse, presented with this chameleon then who's crying, not going to do it again, you know, it's not me, I was under pressure, I've had a terrible childhood, you know, this, that and the other, unemployed, whatever, and then they let him go. So for me, I think the criminal justice system, if it started treating them and, you know, holding them accountable for their abhorrent violent acts most of the time, that's why they tend to end up in court, you know, without the coercive controlling behaviour, which seems to be you know, really hard to get a perpetrator into court and, you know, charges pressed against them because it's so hard to evidence. If they started putting them in prison and giving them a lengthy sentence, you know, I think we would see less perpetrators in terms of high grade perpetrators, shithouse perpetrators. Then you've got your ones who will test the water a bit, you know, your middle level sort of perpetrators. Then you've got your high, obviously dangerous fucking lunatics, you know. And I think if we started, you know, first of all with the shithouse perpetrators, could be a dentist, could be a businessman, don't want their picture in the local paper, don't want to be arrested, don't want to be charged with anything, it's going to ruin their life and reputation. If we went in and said, you know, here's your restraining order, you breach this and you automatically will go to prison for 3 months. That is enough to make them shit themselves. But there's never a consequence for even like a breach of a restraining order. They might get a fine. And I know this because I've got a restraining order on somebody and he's breached it 5 times. Not once has he gone to prison. If he'd have gone to prison on the first breach, I can guarantee I'd put my house on it, he wouldn't have breached it for the second time. Because he is one of these shithouse perpetrators. But looking at the stats, so this was for the year ending March 2025. So our estimated victims combined, right, for domestic abuse is 3.7 million. Those which were recorded by the police are over 800,000. Those suspects referred to the CPS is 76,000. Your suspects charge is 53,000, and then the offenders convicted 41,000, and then there was just over 13,000 non-convictions. So 41,000 out of 3.7 million estimated victims, or look at it as 41,000 convicted out of those suspects referred to the CPS 76,000. You know, the figures are shite. They are shite. And then when we look at coercive controlling behaviour, I think, if I can get the stats up, but off memory, I think there's something like just over 40 odd thousand. Right, so coercive controlling behaviour, so there was 43,000, just over 43,000 offences of coercive controlling behaviour recorded. That was March 23. March 24, only just over 44,000, so it hasn't gone up much. And then basically for the year ending March 2025, just over 49,500.
So out of all of the 3.2 million, and is that men and women, or is that just
Yes, it's 3.7 million. That's combined men and women. Yeah.
right? Okay, so out of 3.7 million, you're getting a 41,000, which are convicted at court.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily That doesn't necessarily mean that they'll ever see the inside of a prison cell either. One of my biggest, well, just on about the restraining order thing, we used to lock up a DA perpetrator. He got locked up 6 times in a month, something like that, for being at this girl's house. She never wanted to make a complaint because of a variety of reasons, but like I remember pulling him out of a wardrobe and stuff like that, and he used to laugh when he was going to the car, like, it's all right, I'll get a 50 quid fine in the morning, I know the judge, they'll just take it off my benefits or whatever I get, and he'd be back there. Now, if every time he breached, he went, right, okay, that's 3 months in jail.
Yeah.
Sorry, what? Oh yeah, by the way, you don't get early release, 3 months in prison.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, and it goes up every time. So then it's 6 months, then it's 9 months, then it's 12 months.
Yeah.
We find as well, Rach, just on about the courts, because of the backlog in the courts, we find that perpetrators of abuse are now opting to go to Crown Courts, and they're opting to go to jury because they know that it'll be 3-4 years before they ever go. So, for example, I currently have a case, it's an ongoing case, I can't talk about it too much, but a case I dealt with in the job, I only had a small role, but this case happened about 2 years ago. The trial was initially scheduled for last September, I believe, and it's been adjourned by the defence for whatever reason, and it's now in June. So the victim is looking at potentially 2 to 3.5 years before they even get anywhere. And the fallout of that is victims move on with their lives. They go, I want to leave that behind me. Or they go, after so long, I don't want to do it anymore. Or there's more risk of interference with victims as well.
Yeah.
Which essentially means that victims being let down and perpetrators aren't being charged. Well, they are being charged, but not being convicted. And they're walking free to then potentially do it again. And it's kind of like a loophole in the system where perpetrators can drag things out to the point where they go, well, they might just drop the charges if we go not guilty. And then if they go guilty on the day, they get fuck all anyway.
Yeah.
I know a case I know a case that I dealt with personally, mate, where he was an horrible bastard. Yeah, horrible bastard. It was one of the worst cases I've ever dealt with. And the girl who was involved, you know, she was lovely, and she'd been through the mill. You know, you name it, it had happened to her. And he went guilty at court, and he got a 2-year restraining order. No, sorry, he got a 1-year suspended sentence, a 10-year restraining order, and like a 300 quid fine. Just my time alone investigating that case will have cost the taxpayer a stupid amount of money because of how much I had to put into it. Now, what message does that send? The guy went to court. He went, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I've had a bad childhood. I've had this. I've had that. I didn't realise what to do." The guy admitted to stalking in the interview. He admitted to every point to prove the stalking, but he denied actually stalking her. I had concrete evidence that of everything he'd done. And the impact on this girl could not be understated. She played ball from start to finish. It was hard to keep her on board, but she played ball. And he walked free. He's walking the streets now. He actually, I managed to convince the CPS lawyer to get him remanded, and they were like, "There's no way I'm remanding him." But I managed to convince it because of your training and because of some of the other things I've looked into, talking about the severity. He then complained that his GPS tag, because he got let out on tag, his GPS tag was upsetting his mental health and he wished to have it removed. And I said, under no fucking circumstances are you removing that tag, because that is the only way we're keeping this victim on board. And after all that, so we completely played the system. He was nice as pie to everybody, a proper chameleon, and he's out walking free. It's like, great. So with you mentioned about police officers, I had a cop message me the other day, big long paragraph saying like, why do we bother? Because they've gone to a job, they've gone to an incident, victim's terrified, they've took the initiative and they've gone, she's got injuries, she's not saying what's happened, we're locking him up, done all the victimless prosecution stuff, put forward everything, and then the CPS NFA'd it because there was no realistic prospect of conviction due to the victim not providing support.
Wow. Do you know what, Jay? On that note, right, there was when I went to Gibraltar and I delivered training to the judiciary over there to magistrates and judges. And they asked me what I thought of victimless prosecutions. And I said, I absolutely agree with it, because that victim only phones the police when they're in a moment of crisis or they think they're going to die, because they know part of those terms and conditions that we spoke about, there's going to be a consequence for one, phoning the police, and two, giving a statement. So they don't phone the police and give a statement lightly because they know there's going to be a consequence of some description along the way. So I told them, yes, I said, I totally agree with the victimless statements and to pursue it. And they said, we're glad you do that, because we actually do that a lot in Gibraltar. And what they found out then, after the court cases, regardless of the outcome, all those victims who they done the victimless prosecutions for were grateful after that they carried on with it, that it was taken out of their hands, because they could basically say, it's not me that's going ahead with it, that it was going ahead by the system. So I do genuinely believe, but if that is the case and then the CPS are not on board, what is the freaking point of doing it?
Yeah, I know cops get really frustrated with it because they get told, you've got in, you can use your body worn evidence, you can put in a disclosure statement, you can do all this, and then you get a CPS lawyer who, because of stats and because they're judged by how many convictions, how many charges they do compared to convictions, so the system, we can bang the drum and we can shout as much as we want, but I think until how the system's actually graded and we take it away from stats and figures, then I can't see much changing, because their criteria will always be the same, in that we have to have X, Y, and Z in order to secure a conviction. Therefore, if we can't secure that conviction, we're not going to charge. And then the police go, well, we're not going to get a charge on this, so why are we going to go through all the effort of protecting it? When ultimately, there's somebody on the other end who's, you know, living with a domestic terrorist.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me about the work you've been doing around non-fatal strangulation.
Okay, so I got involved with the non-fatal strangulation stuff probably about 4 years ago, maybe. Only simply because I didn't know how serious it was. You know, Darren used to, and I quite often put the picture out of Darren with his hands around my throat, which was caught by pure fluke by a friend of mine in a pub. Going to take a picture, and at that moment, Darren had gripped me round the throat. And it's also,
Sorry, Rachel, just with that photo, was that because I've put this forward on cases before, where a lady said that on a regular basis, when he come near me, he'd just put his hand around my throat. He wouldn't apply pressure, he wouldn't try to hurt her, but it was almost like I could do it if I wanted to. In that circumstance, was it a case of he was trying to hurt you, or was it like that's there?
no, it's the control, because we know that, and we do say this when I do deliver training, that, you know, you are 7 times more likely to become a victim of homicide when somebody's put their hands around your neck. Whether, you know, some victims might say choked, throttled, you know, whatever terminology is non-fatal strangulation. And I got involved because I didn't realise how serious it was. Darren used to do it on numerous occasions, you know, grip me by the throat, sometimes put pressure on my neck, and that is why that was the light bulb moment that went off for me to start me leaving him. You know, and he'd squeeze my neck and my throat, and I'd talk like Barry White for a couple of days, you know, and I think, oh, it's all right, it's not the worst thing he's done to me. But when I started working with the Centre of Women's Justice and ADFA and a brilliant MP called, ex-MP called Julia Downs, and also Dr. Kath White from Manchester SAC, the implications of non-fatal strangulation is so serious. It's the second biggest cause of stroke in women under 40 for a start. You only need the
Second
pressure.
biggest.
Yes, yeah. You only need the pressure of a handshake to kill somebody with that pressure on the neck. And what we were saying basically, you know, is victims don't understand the severity of non-fatal strangulation. So then we started working with Alliance for Hope in San Diego, because America have had this as a standalone offence for numerous years. And we started working with them. And what we discovered as well, there were victims who had been non-fatally strangled, hadn't gone and sought medical help or attention, you know, to be checked over, and had died the following days through bleeding, internal bleeding that they didn't know they had. Yeah, so it's really, really serious. So then we got the timeline of non-fatal strangulation. So basically it was I think it was Alliance for Hope, or somebody went to male prison in America, asked for volunteers to take part in this trial. They tested out the non-fatal strangulation and the timeline of it. So there was, I'll bring the stats up, but I know it anyway off by heart. So 6.8 seconds, there was a loss of consciousness. 14 seconds, there was an anoxic seizure. 15 seconds, bladder incontinence. 30 seconds, bowel incontinence. And all those took part in the trial. Between 62 and 152 seconds, they would have been deemed as dead, medically dead. Obviously, nobody was killed in these trials. I just want to point that out. But that is the timeline of non-fatal strangulation. And I always say to people, you know, if you have been non-fatally strangled, go and see if you can get a scan, because you could have internal bleeding, as the Americans were telling us. And that was good, because when I delivered training to the CPS, I done 14, I call them gigs, to the CPS, and it was just after it came into force on the 7th of June 2022. And one of the prosecutors came up to me and she said, oh, I was the first one to charge with this. I said, absolutely amazing, keep charging. And then another guy came up to me and he said, I've charged 10 now with this new offence, he said. And I always say to the police officers, make sure you tell that victim to go to the hospital and seek medical advice, you know, with with the internal bleeding stuff. So, you know, once they get the proper training, once it's in there, you know. And I think, you know, until we train police officers, NHS, anybody that comes into contact with the public, you know, teach them about this, then they're not going to have a bloody clue.
This video was sponsored by my best-selling police memoir, The Job's Fuck Secret Diary of a Police Officer. After 10 years in the police service, I finally left and I decided I need to speak out. This book does a deep dive into police corruption, the real reason why the police force is falling apart, and things you will never hear in the mainstream media. You can check it out in the link in the description of this video. You could also grab some merchandise and support me on Patreon. And now, without further ado, enjoy the video. Wow. I didn't know it was the second highest single stroke. That's blown my mind a little bit, to be honest. And the fact that unconsciousness in 6 seconds, that's not
Yeah.
a long time.
No,
Not a long
no,
time at all.
6.8 seconds, a loss of consciousness. And there was IFAS, the Institute for Addressing Strangulation, and I'm part of the steering group advisory board on that. They've had to fight really hard to get funding to keep this going, because we know funding is awful. But I always say to ministers or whoever I speak to, when you look at domestic abuse and the cost of it, so every person that discloses and then goes through the system, so you might have social services involved, the police, GPs, whatever, it costs around just over £44,000 for each person. For every homicide, they're saying, it costs 2.2 million. So you add all that up over the year and how much it costs. It used to be 66 billion, but I believe the figure's higher than that. That's an old figure. The NHS alone, it costs the NHS alone the equivalent to 70,000 nurses. That was a stat from Safe Lives in 2019, and I'm sure that has gone up and not gone down. But we've got to be funding these services like the Institute for Addressing Strangulation. So they done looked at a 10 years of strangulation and suffocation homicides in England and Wales. There were 342 strangulation homicides between 2011 and 2021. 75% of those victims were female. Also, 96% of cases of domestic strangulation for the homicide where the victim was 16 and over, the sex of the suspect was male. So it is a gendered crime. And the most frequent place of a female to be fatally strangled, 86% strangulation and 74% suffocation, was in the home. So it is massive. And then when you look at the female victims of strangulation homicide, 75% were commonly aged between 25 and 34. And the data shows that 25% of strangulation homicides during 2011 and 2021, the victims who were male were most likely to have been strangled by a friend or an acquaintance. So it is a gendered crime, and we need to keep talking about this because platforms like TikTok, you have people endorsing strangulation in the bedroom. There is no safe way to strangle whatsoever. They've done research on it because people will say, oh, it heightens sexual arousal or makes the orgasm better. Absolute bullshit. Absolute bullshit. It does not.
So, Rach, I just want to move on a little bit, and I want to talk about a little bit of my own experience when it comes to investigating cases of DA. And this is something which is not just my experience. This has been reiterated by a lot of bobbies that contact me, and a lot of things what I see is that because it's such a hot topic in the media, and it's such a hot topic and a directive from the government violence against women and girls, which I believe it should be. There seems to be a case now where certain individuals in the high rungs of the police force are using this as a way to escalate their own careers. Now, what I mean by that is we have a pertinent issue where we need to prevent violence against women and girls, okay? Nobody's going to disagree with that. So you can't argue against the overall premise. However, then what's happening is people are being arrested for, say, having an argument with a partner. It's then a tick in the box to say, great, we have now increased our arrests on domestic abuse by 300%. They don't ever tell you the charge rate or how many times they've actually been sued for unlawful arrest. And what happens is, on paper it looks good, so that person then gets promoted. But the backflack of that is that normal people who have, say, they've had a barney, there's never been any kind of domestic abuse, and they've rang the police to maybe come and help them calm things down, generally it's the man has then been taken away in handcuffs. Then that causes alienation from the family because this person's then potentially kept on bail for 3 to 6 months. Perhaps they're the breadwinner in the house. Perhaps they've got a new young child and tensions have just been escalating. You can have a perfectly happy relationship and marriage, but people still argue. It doesn't have to get volatile and violent. Then what's happening is because officers are being told essentially it's not your choice whether you arrest or not. If well, it is, but if you don't, you will be in the shit. Cops are going slapping on handcuffs with people they know they shouldn't be, which is then causing moral injury. It also desensitizes officers when they do go to a domestic incident because they're not looking for the proper signs and symptoms because they deal with them that often and the outcome's pretty much always the same. That then causes extra work for the officers because a lot of their cases they shouldn't be carrying, which means that so many cases which they do have, which do require extra attention, which are the genuine serious cases, are often overlooked, causing victims to withdraw, causing actually more victims of real victims. I hate the word real victim, but real victim of DA to go unsupported. More perpetrators getting away with it, but on paper it looks like the organisation's tackling the issue. What's your thoughts on that?
Common sense, isn't it? That's where common sense comes in, and sadly, that don't always go hand in hand with any sort of education. And I say that, if somebody phones the police and the police are going to never been to this house before, this property before, never don't know these people, and there's a bit of an escalation, as you've said. People argue. I argue with my husband. I'm probably the one who's more argumentative than Mike.
I can't possibly comment on that. Like, I couldn't possibly see that or not.
But at the end of the day, you do have arguments in relationships. If you didn't, I'd be questioning it, thinking if it's too nicey. But that would be common sense, wouldn't it? If you go into a place you've never been there before, there's a couple that's been rowing, they're not known to the police, you've never had anything up, there's no background history. Why would you want to arrest them? Just give them a both good talking to, basically saying, we're not here because police officers, bless them, I think they got to be like a Swiss Army knife. They got to be a social worker, a teacher, relationship, expert, everything, right? But I think if somebody sits down and says, I probably would, if I was a copper, I'd be like, right, listen, stuff happens in relationships, is there, take them aside, is there potential violence going to happen? Are you scared? Is there power and control in this relationship? When you see there's not, it's just a one-off incident where somebody's just phoned the police, probably more so to piss the other person off and to get them to shut up. That's probably what it is. And I think for when you've got, chief constables, yeah, ticking the box, don't we look great? As you said, it desensitizes coppers. It becomes very blasé then. And then the real victims who are known to the police, who have had a couple of calls made, are then put on the back burner because you've got this fresh case to deal with. And it's not even a case to deal with. So, yeah, it's shit.
Yeah, and it's something valiant and that we need to support and stop. We need to stop violence against women and girls.
Yeah.
I was passionate about investigating those cases. I fucking despise people that abuse men or women,
Yeah.
because I know people that have been through it. I've dealt with a lot of cases like it, and I've obviously been through it myself. So the premise is there, stop violence against women and girls, but the way it's used to benefit somebody else and the way it's impacted and implicated is quite sinister in a way because you're potentially harming victims. And then the other flip side is as well, Rachel, is that if we have this blanket policy of lock up first, ask questions later, and then they say, well, you don't know what's happened and all this stuff. Okay, that's fine. We are then also allowing abusers to then use the police as a proxy for abuse. Because what I've seen happen before is when a victim leaves a relationship, and this has happened a couple of times, when a victim leaves a relationship, or there are issues in family court, or there are issues surrounding child contact, the abuser will ring up and make a false allegation and say, oh, we've had an argument and she's hit me as she's left. She's not. She's just fled the relationship. And then the police are going and arresting the victim. And then, I mean, like I said, I've been arrested. It's the fucking worst experience I've ever had. It was absolutely horrible. I know a lady who I was dealing with the case. The case was 8 months old. The suspect was the female was the suspect, and the victim, who was a male, rang up and said, 8 months ago, my partner pushed me into a wall. They lived 300 miles apart. This was 8 months ago. I wrote all over the log and I said, this, do not arrest this person. I'll deal with it when I get back. I'll invite him for an interview. We'll have a chat and everything else. And I went off, came back. She'd not only been arrested, she had a mental breakdown in custody because of the stress of being locked up. And she wasn't even interviewed because her solicitor kicked off so much and said, release immediately, or we're going to sue the fucking arse off you. Thankfully, they released her. But then when the guy found out that she'd been arrested, he withdrew all complaint and said, great, I can use this for family court now that she's been locked up. So we'd help the perpetrator in that circumstance.
Yeah, family court it just needs scrapping and starting again, because all it does is give the perpetrator the power and control in the family court system. Again, you know, I got a friend who's a magistrate, criminal and family court. She actually stopped being a magistrate in family court because how shit it was, basically. She said, you know, you're in there, you've got all these bundles to read, you know, and she said, you read it, and because she knows she's a criminologist as well, because she knows everything around domestic abuse and stuff like that, she can see what it is. And then you've got others who might be sat in there as well in the court system saying, well, you know, this could be about now, you know, and basically siding with the perpetrator. Family court causes not only financial abuse to the victims, because a lot of the time the perpetrator will get legal aid. You know, I remember supporting, she's a dentist, and her perpetrator was a different national but living in the UK, and he said to her, I will financially ruin you. And this perpetrator has got properties abroad, but yet somehow he gets legal aid. And so far, the last time I spoke to her, which was a couple of years ago, she had over £100,000 in debt with legal fees, because he keeps taking her back to court constantly. And she, you know, she's was having to work on weekends as well, doing other stuff in the dental industry to make more money. And you know, they say to the victims, I will financially ruin you in family court. But sadly, your criminal behaviour doesn't seem to play into the family court system. It's, you know, and I started a petition with another lady, Teresa, around family court, and it's got 228,000 signatures on. Thousands of horror stories on there. So people never just signed it because they thought, oh, that'd be something good to sign, as you see in your change.org emails. People left their own experience of family court on there. It is harrowing. And I presented this at the time to Theresa May when she was PM, and it was a couple of weeks before she left office. And I was invited to number 10. I can't remember what it was for, something about a Voucher SV thing. So I am cheeky, and I am that cheeky person who's not on anybody's payroll, and I'll say it because I don't give a flying frog who I please or offend, because this is my passion. So I thought, oh, I'll take I'll print it off. I redacted all the names and everything, and I took it to number 10. So I had this big bag, you know, sat down and sat opposite Theresa May in the cabinet office, and there was all other people there, and there was a guy next to her who was a junior minister at the time called Edward Aga. The day before, he came to an event I was at and should have been there to listen to victim stories, but he rocked up late, so he never basically heard out any of our stories. So while he was up on the podium and he was saying, you know, oh, I thank you all for coming, you know, blah blah, me being me with the no filter. I mean, I used to have a bit of a filter back then, but it's gone now. I said, oh yes, but Edward, I said, you weren't actually here to hear the stories. I said, but now you are here, I want to give you this. So I give him some sound bites of what people had put in this petition. So when I rocked up to number 10 the next day, he was there. And I said to Theresa May, as we were going, I said, oh, can I just give you this, Prime Minister? And I pushed it across the table. I said, if you don't put that at the heart of the inquiry that you're doing into family courts, I said, it'll stand for nothing. And then Edward Aga said, oh yes, Prime Minister, I've seen some of this. And I said, yes, you have, haven't you? And he said, yes, it is quite. I said, is harrowing the word you're looking for? And he said, oh yes, it is. So that went down to the academics to make up some of the harm report. But what has changed since? Nothing. The abuse continues in family court.
And family court, I find as well. I know quite a few different men who have been abused in family court. So they've been with an abusive female, and they are then removing child access. And because the balance, it goes on the balance of probability. Um, and they've had malicious things put against them, so now they have a restraining order, so they can't contact the children. They're then taken to court for whatever reason. They don't get legal aid, so they don't can't get representation. And because the magistrates are, again, we need to prevent violence against women and girls, they are ignoring the potential abusive traits by the female and looking at the man and going, well, statistically, you're more likely to be the perpetrator. Just on that, there is evidence to suggest that when it comes to domestic abuse in general, that around 40% of men make up the entire pie. Why do you think that, if that is the case, why do you think there's so much emphasis on women and girls and not domestic abuse in general? It seems like if we look at that, we're ignoring 40% of the problem.
Yeah, I think it's because just how the world sees women and girls, we are the most vulnerable out of the two sexes. And I think,
Some feminists have just screamed at this interview now, you know.
yeah.
She
But
just
it's right though.
throw the
It is,
fucking thing at the TV.
yeah, it's like no. It's like no. But it is right. I mean, that is why you see so many people on social media stopping trans women going into female sport because there is a disadvantage. That's
Oh, now
biological.
you've just pissed off. Now you've just pissed off anyone with blue hair and their septum
Well, tough, innit? Tough shit. Gotta say it as it is. Common sense comes back into it, Jay, don't it? But, at the end of the day, my perpetrator was 6'7", 22 stone. He was a bodybuilder with a 60-inch chest. Believe you me, if I could have beat the fucking shit out of him, I would have. When I was in that environment where I was being strangled, or my head punched or whatever it was, if I could have retaliated knowing that I could have overpowered him, my God, I would have. And I say this quite frequently. And I think what we tend to look at, sadly, society, unless the female's a sumo freaking wrestler and the male is about 7 stone wet, the likelihood is that the sumo wrestler, the female, is going to overpower them. So it does come on what you're physically built like, and most men will overpower a woman, and I think that is why the society does look at women and girls more, because we are seen as the most vulnerable in society, and it is wrong, because I've helped male victims that have come to me, and there was one guy, he was 6 foot odd, he was a painter and a decorator, and his female perpetrator was like 4 foot high, and but the manipulation is there, and we should be, my husband, he'd never had a fight in his life, out of the two of us, if I'm being totally honest, I'm the more aggressive, in terms of, because I don't know whether that's something to do not just with my character, because I've always been feisty and I was suppressed in that relationship with Darren, but because and I think I'm always on the defensive now because of what I went through, a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's when you don't recognize what you are, and I know exactly where I am. I can be more argumentative than Mike, but Mike, if I call the police for something, who's going to look like the victim and who's going to look like the perpetrator?
I agree with what you're saying in the sense of when it comes to physical harm that can be caused, it's overwhelmingly women will be physically harmed by men. It's there's also the I've looked into this, and it's men and women abuse each other in different ways, and women tend to be more manipulative and turn other people against them and use the courts as a weapon. And there's also the worry as well of malicious allegations of sexual assault. Now that's one thing what keeps a lot of people. I know you've done an interview with Lad Bible, brilliant interview by the way, and there was someone else who'd been on there who was a male victim of DA, and they said that if I was to leave the relationship, they said, well, I'll tell them that you've raped me. I'll tell them that you've done this. I'll tell them that you beat me, because then you're the one who's going to get going to get locked up, and then you won't be able to see our child, and then the family courts are going to ruin you, and you're going to get this and going to get that. So that fear as well. And I think when we look at it under the guise of violence against women and girls, we automatically frame it as the man is the perpetrator. And I know just anecdotally of stories where officers have spoken to me and they've said they've gone to an address, they've arrested the female, the man's rang the police, they've arrested the female, and then when she's in the car, she's made an allegation of something, or she said, well, last week he did this. They've then relayed this to supervision. They've said, well, we need to reduce violence against women and girls, so de-arrest her and then go lock him up. With the training, what you do, and that's why I think it's so important, is you do talk about the issues, and you do talk about the issues when it comes to women and how women get assaulted and the homicide rates and everything else. But you also push it forward as manipulation is manipulation. You have to be aware of it. You have to look at control and coercive behaviour and how people can present themselves. And that, I think it's absolutely brilliant the work what you do. Just on about again with that, I had a Bobby reach out to me who is 6'3", built like a brick shithouse, and he was being domestically abused by another officer who was, like you said, 5 stone wet through.
Yeah.
And he was seen as the problem because he raised it. Nothing ever happened to her, and then 9 months down the line, when she got wind of it, she made a malicious allegation, and he got like suspended and investigated and everything else. So it's how abuse is perpetrated, and I think people need to understand that as well, and not just look at it as the guise of we need to support blindly one sex or another. It's we need domestic abuse to stop, and how does that present depending on the perpetrator or potential perpetrator as well.
I was going to say as well, Jake, just putting that out there. I get loads of emails, from victims and survivors. Some that have left, some that haven't. But I would honestly say now, if anybody was in a abusive relationship, and I get all that with the false allegations and all, and it's horrendous. And I think anybody found guilty of that should get an automatic custodial sentence, because you were potentially ruining somebody's life by these false allegations, whether that's male or female.
Never happens though.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. But I would say to anybody that is in an abusive relationship, when you're dealing with a rat, you've got to get in the gutter with a rat, and you've got to box clever, and you've got to get all the evidence, because we know it's got to be evidence based. There's apps you can download on your phone that will track, record every phone call that comes in that you receive, text messages, photo screen them and send them, to somebody else or a different inbox somewhere. It's sad. It is sad, because that is what you've got to do. And I say to victims, you've got to get in the gutter with the rat, and you've got to be one step ahead, and you've got to be getting all this evidence gathering and data, to be able to present then actually no, they're the perpetrator.
Yeah, I am. One thing what I always say is the biggest red flag in a relationship is when someone goes, "Yeah, so I've started recording it when they're talking to me," and it's like, why? That's not normal behavior. You shouldn't have to do that. Oh, well, we had an argument the other day, and I recorded it because I wanted to listen back to it because they always make me out to be crazy. It's like, yeah, that's your biggest red flag there, mate.
Yeah.
Fucking listen to that. Another one is as well, Ray. It's just we're going back to what we are saying at the start about when you first start seeing someone. I've always found that the patterns are always the same. It was great, and then it wasn't. People will tell you who they are. You need to be listened to it. Somebody might come out and say, like my ex-partner used to always say, I can be really nasty when I want to be, or I can be awful, or I'll be manipulative, or I'll do this, or I'll do that. And it's like, oh, you.
Yeah,
Oh,
not
no,
yellow
not to me,
you.
you won't. Not to me, no. Like people will tell you who they are, and you have to be switched on to listen to it. But just before we finish, Rach, what needs to change in the services and the courts, and like the IDVA service as well? IDVAs are massively overworked. I was speaking to a lady the other day who's got 20 high risk cases, just her carrying it, and she's always getting pulled off those cases to deal with other cases, which means and the cops are the same. I'm sure CPS lawyers are the same. So what needs to change?
Well, clearly investing in those services, because they are all services, whether you're police, CPS, social worker, IDVA, ring fencing that money for domestic abuse charities. It's not always the bigger organisations who do have the majority of the pie are the best, and I have found that out over the years. These big orgs, they get millions of pounds in funding, and then you get the little local domestic abuse service who is scratching around for peanuts and the crumbs left, that do amazing works. So we got to filter out those that are doing good stuff as well, but ring fence the funding. I think that we need more police officers. I think we should have specialist domestic abuse units, because there was, when I was when I was abused and got shot, there was a specific domestic abuse unit with specially trained officers. I think, as I said to you, police got a hard enough job to do as they have, without going to somebody who's in mental health crisis, somebody who's going to jump from a bridge. You got, right, so am I going to that first? Am I going to this road incident? Am I going to the pub because there's a scrap in there? I think we should have specialist units for that. I do also feel that, every hospital should have an IDVA in the hospital as well. And basically making sure everybody's trained to the best of their ability. And then when we come, and that includes judges and magistrates, because trying to get in to deliver to magistrates is like pushing a camel through an eye of a needle. It is so hard. And I delivered a session years ago with Professor Jane Monkton Smith, a guy called Dave Thomason up in Cheshire Police. I think he's really high up in.
Oh yeah, I know Dave.
Yeah. So we delivered this session free to magistrates, and the person who'd organised it had emailed the local magistrates association and said, right, we've recorded this, do you want to send it round to those who couldn't make it, or send it wider? No thanks. Do not
Really?
want to. Yeah. And I think the same goes for judges. And you know that I'm very vocal, and a couple of years ago I was talking about a case that was local to me just before lockdown. Anthony Williams and Ruth Williams, he basically started strangling her at the top of the stairs. She managed to break free, grabbed her car keys, and as she was going through the door, he snapped her neck at the bottom of the stairs. This guy was basically 70 years of age, and his wife was not far in front or behind that age. Apparently she was lovely, she was well known in the community as, that nice humble little lady that you used to see walking past. Anyway, I'd retweeted a tweet about that, and basically said it doesn't start with murder, so we know there's going to be a backstory to this. Other people did in the sector, blah blah blah. Anyway, I had a phone call then from a police officer asking me to take it down, and I was like, but why? And he said, basically, always come to the judge's attention, because the court was in court, that you've tweeted this, and he wants you to take it down. So I spoke to my solicitor first, and he said, well, what did you say? And I said, basically, it doesn't just start with murder. Retweeted the BBC article about this case, and he said, just take it down for now, which I did, reluctantly so. And then the next thing then, I had a phone call to say, the judge wants you down for the sentencing. He's been found guilty of manslaughter, and the judge wants you down for the sentencing. So I'm like, what the fuck is this all about? Anyway, I'm fuming now. So I ends up speaking to Harriet Wistrich in the Centre for Women's Justice, who was like, oh, you can have your knuckles wrapped. I said, I tell you now, I said, I will go to prison first. So anyway, what had happened, Jay, was an assembly member had retweeted my tweet. I didn't know that. I'm not responsible for an assembly member retweeting my tweet. So we both were called down to the hearing, which was on the Thursday. Basically, this guy got 5 years. So he's out now enjoying the money. There was over £100,000 in his bank account, but apparently he was really depressed and worried about finances going into lockdown. Anyway, we got called down to the hearing, to the sentencing, but like I said, he was already sentenced. We got called into the court then. The assembly member gave a speech of how sorry she was. I then got up and said, I would never jeopardise a case with every, fibre in my body. And he basically just said to me, I just wanted you to know there was no domestic abuse involved.
Bollocks.
At that point, Jay,
Absolute
I knew
bollocks.
exactly. At that point, I nearly bit my tongue off. So I put my mask back up and I sat down and I thought, I've just got to get out of here because I'm going to explode. So I got out of there and I was so infuriated with the sentencing and what he got found guilty of and the judge's remarks about there was no domestic abuse involved that I sent the judge a copy of my book. Um, a load of stand up to domestic abuse badges. I printed off the homicide timeline from Gloucester University that Jane Monckton Smith had done. Printed that off, sent it recorded delivery down to this judge, right? I didn't hear anymore. Then, what was interesting, when I was delivering to the CPS one of their gigs, two CPS come up to me during the break. I won't say whether they were male or female, but they come up to me and they said, your parcel, now how did they know about the parcel? Your parcel that was sent in to the court in Swansea, I can tell you it was more than the judge that got educated. So for me being dragged down to the court that day, potentially going to have my knuckles wrapped, that was worth that because the next sentence that that judge gave out, which was for a female homicide, he had 18 years. So, yeah. But my mouth does get me into trouble.
I mean, but it does well as well. So
Yeah.
it's like a coin, isn't it? You know, one side it gets you to shit, but the other side it lands well. So, Rach, do you think that there should be same as we have for sexual offences? Do you think there should be a register for people that are charged and convicted, not just men or women, but domestic abuse perpetrators? The
Yeah, a
same as
hundred
we have a
percent.
Clare's Law, etc.
100% there should be a register, because then, I know we got Clare's Law, but I don't know what you think about it, but I spoke to Michael, is it Michael Brown, which was Claire Woods' father. Sadly, he passed, I think it was last year or the year before. And I spoke to him and he said, the Clare's Law is great. He said, but sadly, he said it has been hijacked by bureaucracy. And he said, police officers tell me it's a lot of paperwork and it's a bit of a chore to do it, even though the result is good for those that are inquiring. But I do think there should be a national domestic abuse register. And I think, to be honest with you, I think it should be open to the public. Because if we even with no details other than a name and a date of birth, if you're with somebody, and you want to double check pretty quick because, you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, this don't seem right. You can go on that register, just tap in a name and a date of birth. You don't need to know what they've done, but just to say yes, they're on the register. That's all. That would be good enough.
And then, of course, if you want to know more, then you can do a proper disclosure. Yeah, yeah, I think there definitely should be. I don't know if I agree with the just free access thing. But I agree that there should be a register, 100%. Um, because I know this whenever I've given a Clare's Law or I've sat with someone who's had a Clare's Law, I also like that it's even if the person I like that there's two things with it. There's a right to know and an ought to know, isn't there? And it's oh, I want to know because I'm with this person. All right, well, you're actually my sister, and I think you should know whether there's something's happened, or the police can put it in for them. So I think that's really good. Rachel, your book is The Devil at Home.
Yes.
It's got thousands of good reviews on Amazon. I've read it myself. It is absolutely fantastic. It's very eye-opening, very brutally honest in parts as well. You were kind enough to sign it for me too, which is absolutely lovely. And you've also got a copy of my book, which
I
is also
haven't. Do
very
you know
good.
what? I passed your book yesterday to a friend who's a CEO of a domestic abuse charity here, and I said to her, "Have you read it?" She goes, "No." So she's taking it away, and I said, "I know you've got it, mind." I said, "I'm like a library." I said, "You've got 2 weeks."
Yeah, you got a little stamp on it as well.
Yeah.
Rachel, where can people find your work? Tell us what you're currently up to, and plug anything else you want.
So basically, the website is www.sutda.standuptodomesticabuse.org. There's plenty of stuff on there. At the moment, I'm just trying to get more training done for organisations. So I'm delivering training, and basically, yeah, just dealing with the emails that come in on a daily basis, where they think that the police haven't seen something that they should have. So I tend to sort of like escalate it a bit, being an id for myself as well now. So yes, I'm just out there doing podcasts, you know, getting involved. I love politics, so if anybody does decide to follow me on any of my, usually on Instagram, I am right into politics. I love politics, and I did apply to be a local Senate member, but they come back and said I was too argumentative and sweary.
Doesn't sound like you at all.
So I don't think, yeah. So I don't think that that's a career career move for me. So I'm just going to sit back on the fringes and help the party that I support in any way I possibly can. And you know, people might be like, "Oh no," but it's Reform, by the way. But yeah, so I just too sweary and argumentative at the moment. So and I'm just going to carry on being too sweary and argumentative.
The way the world should be. Rachel, you are amazing. Thank you for everything what you do. Everybody, make sure you follow Rachel's channel. Make sure you follow and check out this book as well. Like I said, it's absolutely brilliant. Really, really good. Links to everything will be in the description. Rachel, until next time.
Cheers, Jay.